You've been pushing yourself harder than anyone around you knows. And still, it doesn't feel like enough. When someone says, just rest, something in you tightens, because resting feels like falling behind. The Buddha noticed this exact exhaustion, not laziness, not weakness, but the quiet ache of someone who has forgotten why they started running. That was 2,500 years ago. Today's teaching was written for this moment, the one you're in right now. It was just past the peak of spring. Somewhere in India, near a grove of bamboo where the monks had made their home, there stood a large tree. It was just beginning to let go of its blossoms. Each time the wind moved through, white petals drifted down in silence, one after another, without a sound. The disciples had gathered beneath that tree and were sitting quietly together. A petal fell, then another. No one spoke, only the sound of the wind, and somewhere in the distance, the soft hum of a bee filled the air around them. The Buddha was there too, eyes gently narrowed. He simply watched the petals fall. One of his disciples spoke of that morning many years later. In that stillness, he said, every answer was already there. The disciple had arrived that morning with 3 urgent questions, each one carefully prepared, each one burning in his chest, like a coal. By afternoon, walking back along the path through the bamboo, he realized he had forgotten all 3. He did not know when it had happened. At some point between the falling of one petal and the next, the questions had simply dissolved, the way mist dissolves when you are not watching it. Among the disciples was a man named Ania. He had been born into a farming family. From the time he was small, rising before sunrise and working until long after dark was simply the way things were done. He never learned to be idle. He was taught without anyone needing to say it that rest was something close to shame. Even after he became a monk, that quality never left him. He was the first back from the morning alms round, the one who split the most firewood, the one who sat longest in meditation. The other disciples called him the man of diligence. That somewhere along the way, a shadow crept into Dania's face. Dark circles formed beneath his eyes. He began eating less. When the other monks greeted him, he answered with a vague, distant expression, as though he were somewhere else entirely. And yet he never stopped working. If anything, he pushed harder, as though something inside him were driving him forward, relentlessly. One morning, the Buddha was walking through the bamboo grove when he came across Dania sitting alone at the base of a tree. Both hands rested on his knees, his head bowed, perfectly still. The Buddha walked over quietly and lowered himself to sit beside him. For a while, neither of them spoke. A breeze moved through the branches, and a single petal drifted down and came to rest on Dania's hand. At last, Dania spoke. I work every day. I rise earlier than anyone. I move more than anyone. And yet, why do I feel so hollow? There was no exhaustion in his voice, no complaint, only a quietness, as though something essential had been taken out of him and had not come back. The Buddha did not answer right away. Instead, he glanced upward at the branches overhead. Even as the petals had begun to fall, the bee kept on collecting, never damaging a single bloom, drifting lightly from one to the next, unhurried and sure. Danya, the Buddha said, look at that bee. Danya lifted his eyes and followed it. Do you think that bee notices the color of the flowers? Do you think it stops to enjoy the fragrance? Does it worry about when the blossoms will fall? Danya shook his head. It is simply with the flower in front of it. It is not flying toward the next one while it's still at this one. It is not mourning yesterday's flowers. It is simply here. The Buddha paused for a moment, then continued. Tell me, Danya, what is it that gets you up each morning? Danya had no answer. Is it because you fear being seen as lazy? Or do you believe that if you keep moving, something will finally be enough? Those words settled into Danya's chest, quietly, the way a petal settles to the ground. After a long silence, Danya said at last, It's that I feel like I'm not enough. No matter how much I do, it's never enough. The Buddha nodded. He did not deny it. He did not try to encourage him. That feeling of not being enough, where do you think it comes from? Danya could not answer. He looked down at the petal still resting in his palm, as if searching for the answer there. Does a flower grieve the fact that it must fall? Does a bee lament that it hasn't gathered enough? The wind moved again, and several more petals drifted across the sky. That morning, no more words passed between them. Only the hum of the bee and the quiet presence of falling petals remained in the space between them. When Danya rose to return to the monastery, his steps were no slower than before, but something in them had changed, the way a river changes after rain, not in its direction. That evening, the other monks noticed he had left a small pile of firewood unfinished beside the chopping block. He had simply set down the axe and walked inside when the bell rang for the meal. I'd like to sit with Danya's words for a moment, that feeling of not being enough. He gave everything he had, and still, he felt empty. No matter how much he accomplished, it was never enough. That experience is not his alone, so why is it that the harder we work, the more drained we become? Buddhism points quietly to something at the root of this. The suffering isn't caused by the work itself. It comes from the belief we've attached to it. The quiet assumption that if I work this hard, I deserve to feel rewarded. That if I do this much, it should be enough. In other words, it's not the effort that hurts us, it's the expectation we've woven into the effort. The belief that results must follow that creates the pain. And every time that expectation goes unmet, the voice grows louder. Still not enough. Still need to do more. This is the moment when diligence becomes something closer to self-punishment. Buddhism holds the word diligence, what it calls right effort, in very high regard. But this is not a teaching that says straining endlessly is a virtue. Right effort means simply doing what needs to be done, right now, in this moment, without carrying the weight of past results, without waiting for future rewards, just turning toward what is in front of you. That is what the bee was doing. The bee does not agonize over how much nectar it gathered yesterday. It does not fly with one eye on tomorrow's weather. It is simply with the flower that is there. Here's another way to look at it. Many of us carry a fixed image of ourselves, the kind of person who works hard, who never slacks off, who cannot afford to rest. And sometimes without realizing it, we keep pushing forward not because the work calls for it, but because we are protecting that image. But Buddhism would gently ask, where did that image come from? A childhood shaped by strict expectations, a memory of being scolded for being lazy, a deep longing to be seen and valued. These experiences, countless of them, layered over time, may have given rise to the person who cannot stop, who cannot rest. Was the hardworking self always there from the beginning, or did it appear, the way things appear, when certain conditions came together? This is not about tearing yourself down. It is simply an invitation to notice the attachment to who I must be may have been quietly pulling your gaze away from the act itself. From right here, right now, the cherry blossom does not bloom in fear of falling. It blooms and it falls. And in that whole movement, there is beauty. Perhaps diligence works the same way, not bound to outcomes, turned simply and quietly toward the act at hand. That is where Buddhism finds the real meaning of effort. And if just once you could work without needing that work to prove anything about you, not your worth, not your dedication, not your right to rest, what might that feel like? A monk once described it this way: sweeping the temple steps in the early morning, not to make them clean, not to be seen sweeping, but simply because there was a broom in his hands and leaves on the ground. That, he said, was the first morning in years he had not felt tired. And when he set down the broom, he did not feel he had accomplished something. He felt simply that he had been somewhere. That is a very different kind of arriving. Let's bring this into the texture of everyday life. Take work, for instance. You stay late every night. You think about it through the weekend. The sense of urgency never quite goes away. And then a colleague gets promoted ahead of you, and something bitter rises in your chest. After everything I gave. That feeling, where does it come from? Is it that your dedication wasn't honored? Or is it that you cannot let go of the belief that if you just don't stop, eventually it will be enough? The bee doesn't feel resentful when another bee gathers more. It is simply with its flower, not because it has no sense of self, but because when you are fully with this flower, right here, there is no room left for comparison. Or think about raising children. You pour yourself into it every single day, and still your child doesn't seem to grow the way you hoped, and you lie awake wondering, did I do something wrong? Did I not give enough? The love itself is not the problem, but the expectation quietly woven into it, I gave this much, so they should become this, can slowly cloud the way you see the child who is actually standing in front of you. The cherry blossom does not choose the day it falls. Wind comes and it falls. Rain comes and it falls. We do not call that failure. It simply showed its fullest form under whatever conditions that moment held. Your child, too, is doing something with everything they have, right now. To see that, truly see it, you may need to let the film of what should be grow just a little thinner. And then there's the question of aging, of the body slowly changing. Things you once did without thinking become harder. Strength fades, memory softens. You move through the day a little differently than you used to. And sometimes you find yourself measuring the present against the version of me from before and feeling the distance like a loss. But consider this. Does that earlier version of you still exist somewhere? Or did it appear, the way things appear, when a particular set of conditions was present? Those conditions have shifted. New ones are here now. And in this body, in these conditions, there is still something you can do, something you can turn toward. That is not so different from the bee finding its flower. What runs through all of these moments is the same thing. It is not the absence of something we actually have that creates suffering. It is the gaze fixed on something we believe should have been there. Diligence, real diligence, begins with shifting that gaze, not by doing more, but by changing how you meet what you're already doing. And sometimes that shift is barely visible from the outside. A woman in her 60s, caring for her husband through illness, described it this way. One morning she stopped counting the months, stopped measuring how far things had fallen from what they once were, and simply made him tea. The cup was the same, the hands holding it were the same, but something in the room had changed. She didn't arrive at that moment through effort. It came when she stopped trying to carry the weight of every morning that had come before, and let this one be only itself. That is what the bee knows, not as philosophy, but as its whole life, wing by wing, flower by flower, now by now. There is one small thing I'd like to invite you to try today. When you sit down to do something, anything, give yourself just the first 5 minutes. In those 5 minutes, look only at what is directly in front of you. If you're writing an email, just that email. If you're washing the dishes, just that dish. If you're working through a report, just this one line. When a voice in your head says, there's still so much after this, or this might change how people see me, or I should be moving faster, when that voice comes, simply notice it. Just say quietly to yourself, there it is. And then come back to what's in front of you. You don't need to chase the thought away. You don't need to silence it. Just notice and return. That is all. The monks who practiced alongside the Buddha brought this kind of attention even into the simple act of walking. Lifting the foot, moving it forward, placing it down. Each step, just that step. Some of them continue this way for years. You may find that 5 minutes is more than enough to lose the thread. Your mind will wander, probably almost immediately. That's fine. The bee gets blown off course by the wind sometimes, and then it finds its way back to the flower. I won't promise that this will change anything, but it's possible that the way you meet what you're doing, the quality of presence you bring to it, may start to look a little different. When the Buddha sat beneath that tree, watching the petals fall, I think his gaze was something like that. Not waiting for the next thing, not grieving the last thing, simply here. There is a story of a calligrapher who spent 40 years writing the same character, water, each morning before breakfast. When a student asked him why, he said only that he had not yet written it completely. He was not trying to perfect the character, he was trying to arrive at the moment of writing it. People sometimes laugh when they hear that story, a little nervously, the way we laugh when something lands too close. But then they go home and sit down at their desks and find the cursor blinking and the coffee going cold, and somewhere in that ordinary stillness, they understand what he meant. The things you did with your hands today, the The time you gave to someone without making it a big thing. The tasks you moved through quietly, without anyone watching. Were you doing those things to be seen? Or were they simply there, and so you did them? There's no need to rush toward an answer. Just let the question rest with you for a little while. A farmer doesn't stop to explain to the soil why he is planting. He kneels, presses the seed in, and moves to the next row. And when the rains come, he does not remind the field what he has done. The harvest, if it comes, comes quietly, the way most true things do. The bee teaches us diligence precisely because each moment is fleeting, and we explored that truth of impermanence through nature's own quiet language in a previous teaching. The cherry blossom doesn't bloom because it wants to be admired. The bee doesn't fly because it hopes to be praised. And yet people gather beneath the blossoms, and the flowers the bee visits grow into fruit. Something is passing between things, quietly, without announcement. Somewhere in the work you did today, something may already be reaching someone in a shape you can't quite see yet. Something may be accumulating, unnoticed, taking form. There's no way to prove that right now, but the bee doesn't need proof. It is simply with this flower. Even if you're tired, even if you feel hollow, you made it here to this moment, and that alone means something is already in motion. Thank you for being here with this channel today. I hope your day is quiet and soft and a little more yours. A candle doesn't measure how far its light travels before it decides to burn. And somewhere tonight, someone may be sitting in exactly the warmth you left behind, without either of you ever knowing. They don't need to find each other for it to be real. The river doesn't wait to be thanked before it reaches the sea. Tonight, try just one thing. A small step is enough. One story a day. In a week, your words will change. In a month, your eyes will change. In a year, the same world will look completely different.